This is what would happen if humans fell asleep for 1 year. Up first, after just 5 seconds, all the cars on the road would begin to crash and would completely pile up on each other, which would be a mess. About 40% of people say they drive daily, so just imagine how many cars that would be. Next up, just after 1 minute, everybody would be sleeping in the most random and obnoxious places. Like in the doctor's office, a grocery store, or just in the middle of the street. Who really knows, because everybody would just fall asleep completely at random. Next up, after 20 minutes, all the planes in the sky that were flying would begin to fall back down to the ground. On average, there is 9.7 thousand planes in the sky at once, and they are carrying over 1.2 million people, so this wouldn't be good at all. But if this does happen, let's just hope none of us are in a plane. Next, after 12 hours, millions of people would be dead. This is because whatever activity they were doing before they fell asleep could result in their death, like a plane crash, car crash, or just falling and hitting their head. So let's all hope this never happens.
Did God come down on the set of this film? Some people think so. This is actor Jim Caviezel, who played Jesus Christ in the film The Passion of the Christ. This movie from 2004 basically depicts Jesus' story all the way up through his crucifixion. But there were a lot of very strange things that happened on set while they were making this movie. Lightning actually struck Jim Caviezel twice while they were filming the movie. And it also struck another member of the production team. During the filming of the movie, Jim lost 45 pounds. And his body eventually ended up shutting down. He had to have 2 open heart surgeries during the filming of this movie. In addition, during the scenes when Jesus is whipped, Jim was actually whipped on accident, which left a 14-inch scar on his back. Oh yeah, there's also the fact that Jim's shoulder was dislocated during filming as well, and he suffered immensely with hypothermia and pneumonia, stemming from the filming of the scenes of him hanging on the cross. All of these strange events have people thinking that there may have been some sort of divine intervention on the set of that film, and that these accidents and mishaps may be supernatural in nature. Regardless though, Jim Caviezel's powerhouse performance as Jesus enshrined him in the Cinema Hall of Fame. And there are some more crazy behind-the-scenes stories from this movie that we could talk about in another TikTok.
These are creepy and messed up true crime facts you probably didn't know, Part 1. David Parker Ray, also known as the Toy Box Killer, abducted and drugged his victims, and when they woke up, they were played recordings in which he described in detail the torture they'd experience over the next 30 days. And what's even more messed up is that you can listen to this recording on YouTube right now. And here's the torture room he kept them in. Next, the Oakland County child killer killed at least 4 children between 1976 and 77. The parents of one of the abducted boys held a press conference in which they begged for their son to be returned, and the mother said when he did return, she will feed him his favorite meal, which was KFC chicken. Days later, the boy's dead body was discovered. He was wearing freshly cleaned pressed clothing, and in his stomach, contents revealed that his last meal had been KFC chicken. The killer is yet to be caught to this day. Joe Metheny would gut his victims and then mix their flesh with animal meat, and then sell his burgers at his fast food stand. Just imagine eating a serial killer's burger made of human meat. Next, despite being one of the most prolific serial killers of all time, Ted Bundy actually once worked at a suicide hotline, and also saved a 3-year-old child from drowning in a pool. But that doesn't make up for all the horrific things this man did.
Was a container full of dead babies. And
Whoa.
in 1982 in California, there was this doctor and he had a shipping container in his backyard. And I'm not sure if he was like making payments to pay it off. So he failed to make payments. Check didn't go through. Somebody went to go repo it. So they took the container and stuff. And first of all, it was mad fucking heavy. It was hard for them to put it on the truck. So hard that they couldn't take it off the truck.
Damn, what the
That's
fuck?
how heavy it was, yeah. So it was so heavy that they had to open it and basically unload it one by one. As soon as they opened it, one of the workers ended up getting hit by something. And it was a dead baby.
What the fuck?
As soon as that happened, they ended up calling the supervisor. Supervisor comes, they ended up seeing that in these cardboard boxes were a lot of plastic containers containing dead fetuses and dead babies. Exactly over 16,500
Babies.
dead babies were in there, bro. The authorities were called. Basically what that was part of an abortion clinic. Imagine seeing that, bro. Your fucking regular day at work.
I would get traumatized.
But people were saying that back then was when the news actually showed
Fucked up shit?
fucked up shit.
So this shit was on the news?
It was covered on the news, yeah.
What the
I'm gonna
fuck?
show you the videos now of like the people getting interviewed, like the workers and shit.
I got a radio call from Ron Gillette. They said the men were throwing up and there was something really wrong.
One of them fell down and hit me right in front of my feet. It was opened up, and there it was. It was a mutilated
This woman vanished and then reappeared after 42 years. This mysterious case, however, leaves me with more questions than answers. Flora Stevens was living in New York when she vanished 48 years ago. Her husband dropped her off at a doctor's appointment in August 1975 and just never saw her again. She was 36 when she disappeared and was working at a Catskills resort. She vanished from Monte Carlo, about 70 miles from New York City. It was a complete mystery where she went for all of these years, and even now she's been found, the mystery still remains. Flora was discovered by investigators who were working on an unrelated cold case. She was found at a nursing home 23 miles from Boston. During this time, she was going by the name Flora Harris. There are some incredibly tragic facts about this case. The first being that Flora actually has dementia and therefore has limited ability to help detectives work out what happened. She was, however, able to identify this old photo of herself. They had this image of an ID card of Flora's, and she actually looked at the image and said, "That's me." Medical records show that she had been living in care homes in New Hampshire and New York City before moving to the home she's currently in 2001. Tragically, she's got no living relatives. Her husband passed away in 1985, never knowing what happened to Flora.
Excuse me, what are you doing? No, I just saw you put that underneath her dress.
The man you just saw in that video was 21-year-old Thomas Elliott from North Carolina. And after he was caught on camera trying to secretly film under a girl's dress, he was arrested. Now, Thomas was actually a volunteer at a local elementary school, which meant that before all this happened, he was working very closely with children. Disturbingly, authorities announced they were actually searching his phone for any materials that may be inappropriate related to kids. Now, this is shocking, but it's not surprising. Time and time again in these stories, these predators seek out places like schools to volunteer or work because they get easy access to the most vulnerable part of our population, children. Now, in the video, Thomas actually tries to backtrack and claim this is all one big misunderstanding. But you can clearly see what he was doing in the footage. And I hope that they prosecute this guy to the fullest extent of the law. This is truly deplorable behavior, and I haven't been as shocked as I was when I saw that video in a while. And hopefully this moment that was caught on camera, not the moment that Thomas was expecting to capture on camera, but this one, haunts him until he dies.
You won't believe what these teenagers allegedly did to their Spanish teacher. Willard Miller and Jeremy Goodale from Iowa were 16 at the time of the brutal killing of their Spanish teacher. Noema Graber, a 66-year-old teacher at Fairfield High School, vanished on the 2nd of November 2021 after going on her normal daily walk in Fairfield. The following day, her badly beaten body was discovered. She was found in a park near where she regularly walked. She was concealed under a tarp, wheelbarrow and railroad ties and suffered trauma to the head. 2 days after her body was found, police announced the arrests of two 16-year-olds, William and Jeremy. William had actually met with his teacher at the school regarding a bad grade that he'd received in her class. He was concerned that this would harm his overall grade average. It's believed that the innocent teacher drove to the park after work at the school. She left her car at around 4 p.m. in the car park. It's believed that during her walk, the teens jumped out and attacked her with a baseball bat. Witnesses reported seeing the teacher's van leave the car park around 42 minutes after she'd arrived. They spotted two males driving away in it. A classmate spoke out about how Willard would talk aggressively of his hatred for his 66-year-old teacher. The boy's Snapchat message history is being used in trial as evidence. Presumably, the boys mistakenly thought that once you have read a Snapchat message, it disappears forever. However, that's not the case, and police are able to find a huge amount of information from phones, even from deleted messages. In the chat history, Jeremy allegedly revealed that the pair were involved in the planning, execution, and disposal of evidence. The messages also divulge information about how the two surveilled the teacher and disposed of her body. Both teens are charged with first-degree murder, and the trial is scheduled for next month.
This pedophile who worked at Disney World is worse than you could ever imagine. And for his job, he was surrounded by children daily until he was caught. This is Paul Veal. He's from Davenport, Florida, and he's truly a twisted man. After he was arrested in June of this year by the Polk County Sheriff's Office, which is led by Sheriff Grady Judd, it's been revealed that Paul is facing a whopping 540 charges of CP. So Paul worked at Cosmic Rays Cafe in the Magic Kingdom in Disney World. I've definitely eaten at this restaurant before when we visited the park, and it's one that people really love. And honestly, Disney World is the perfect place for a predator to call home. So this is incredibly disturbing. I'm about to read you a quote from Sheriff Grady Judd. This is him when he's talking about Paul. He says, "He was a sadomasochist. There were photos where they tied up babies in preparation for SA. There was a weeks-old child where the child's hands are tied behind her back. Can you believe that?" I mean, that's one of the most disturbing things I've read about in a long time. And look at this guy. He was working at a place in Disney World surrounded by children every single day. Now, predators are arrested at Disney World all the time. It seems to be a place where people like this flock because they know they're going to have easy access to children. And that's a really, really frightening concept. Now, Disney has done, for the most part, their part in checking people's backgrounds and, obviously making sure they're not hiring the wrong people. But this just goes to show that even if people have a squeaky clean record, you have no idea what they're doing in the shadows. And I'm just glad that Paul, along with all these other men and all the other people that have been caught over the years, were captured. Because this story is just, once again, incredibly disturbing.
This man from Stevenage used his position as a police officer to get away with unspeakable crimes. It was October 2021 in Hertfordshire. David Carrick, originally from Wiltshire, was a Metropolitan Police officer. He was taken in for questioning after being arrested himself this time for a serious allegation. A woman came forward to say that the pair had met on a dating app and he'd then R'd her. She told police that he tried to get her drunk and then R'd her in a hotel room. Now, this obviously gained media attention, and over the months that followed, David's face was on news channels and he started getting recognised. This was the catalyst that enabled more brave victims to come forward. Suddenly, many stories were being rang in about David's horrific abuse of multiple victims. The crime spanned over a staggering 17 years. The victims were from multiple different areas, and police were stunned by how similar their stories were. David had clearly been incredibly manipulative and controlling. He'd been a police officer for over 20 years. Obviously, with his position came a lot of power and the ability to abuse that power. Victims stated that he used his job in order to intimidate them and state that they wouldn't be believed. He convinced the women that they wouldn't be taken seriously if they reported the crimes. Now, David shockingly had been reported a total of 9 times. Infuriatingly, none of the complaints resulted in any charges. He was allowed to continue to have access to really vulnerable people in his job as a police officer. Now, luckily, as this all started to snowball, some of the victims had some text messages off him. They were able to use these as evidence. Horrifically, multiple victims had harrowing stories of being locked in cupboards and being urinated on by David. He eventually pleaded guilty to 49 charges against 12 women. Some of the charges covered multiple incidents and a total of 85 offences, including 48 Rs. He was given 36 life sentences and will serve more than 30 years in prison.
This doctor in New York City was just charged with 20 counts of violating 6 different women while under anesthesia. This is Z. Allen Chang, a 33-year-old gastroenterologist from New York City. Before he was terminated from his position, he was employed here at New York Presbyterian Hospital in Queens. So apparently this guy was first arrested last December when his girlfriend filed a police report. Apparently Z had showed up at her door, knocked on her door, and when she opened it up, he had knocked her out with a surgical mask. This mask had been stuffed with cotton balls and then soaked in an unknown liquid. His girlfriend didn't remember anything about what happened afterwards. She only remembered waking up, but eventually she discovered a disturbing video that Z had recorded. Apparently, after knocking her out unconscious, Z had assaulted her unconscious body. He had videotaped the entire assault, and when she went through the other files on his device, she discovered that he had been doing this to his own patients at the hospital. Obviously, she went to the police immediately. They arrested him and they searched his apartment, and they found a number of different drugs like fentanyl, ketamine, LSD, and like I said, other drugs. Then the other victims came forward. One 19-year-old girl claimed that he assaulted her at the hospital a long time ago. Prosecutors have claimed that he gave her an unneeded rectal exam and then injected her with some sort of foreign liquid, knocked her unconscious, and assaulted her. And this guy's victims are age ranges 19 to 47 years old. Apparently, the other videos that investigators found on this guy's devices showed that he assaulted women in Las Vegas, New York, San Francisco, and even Thailand. So this was a doctor, someone who you trust with your health. And he was taking advantage of that trust, injecting random patients with this foreign liquid that no one has released the information on about yet. Then assaulting their unconscious bodies, filming the whole thing, and keeping that footage for his own gratification. This is super disgusting, and I really hope that this guy gets a super high prison sentence.
This is Craig Stockard. Let's talk about why he's a sick person and needs to go to jail. So in 2011 in Central California, some teenagers broke into his barn and stole some CDs. You know, CD burning was super popular back in the day. Here's the crazy thing. Upon examining these CDs when they got home, they found some disgusting stuff on them, if you catch my drift. Some Dan Schneider type stuff. And this dude had a lot of that nasty stuff on a bunch of hard drives. The teens did not care if they got in trouble. They went and reported this finding to the police. Police obtained a warrant. They went to Craig Stockard's property. They found 3 computers, a hard drive, and a bunch of other just random pictures scattered everywhere of all this nasty stuff. Apparently he'd been collecting this stuff for 5 years and growing a collection. He was booked on possession of CP, but he got off with a slap on the wrist and a $25,000 bail that he posted. So he paid $25,000, he got off, he walks free today. People like this though, they need to be in jail. I was mad reading this story because he got off with just a slap on the wrist. Let me know what you guys think about the story in the comment section below. And as always, these videos are for informational purposes only.
This is the UK's most famous missing boy. In September 2007, Andrew Gosden was just 14 years old. He was a very intelligent boy and was top of his class in most classes at school. He was an introvert that usually spent most of his time at home. The day before Andrew went missing seemed completely normal. He went to school, he had some tea, and then he watched some TV. However, on September the 14th, he seemed more irritable than normal. Instead of getting the bus to school that morning like his parents thought he was, he went to a cash point and withdrew £200. CCTV then captures him walking home, where he changed his clothes into a Slipknot t-shirt. When he left the house, he didn't take his charger with him, and he also didn't take £100 that he'd saved up. He didn't take his passport, but he did take his house key, which indicates he was going to come home. He bought a one-way ticket to London and was last seen leaving King's Cross station at about 11:30. Frustratingly, the school had actually tried to contact Andrew's parents to say that he hadn't turned up to school that day, but they dialed the wrong number and left an answer phone message on the wrong phone. His family was completely cleared of any suspicion, and the family and the school and all of the students went to London and they were handing out loads of flyers. Weirdly, a year after this incident, a man came to a police station to say that he had information about Andrew. Now, the police station was unmanned, so the person spoke to this man just over an intercom system and sent a police officer down there. Mysteriously, by the time the police officer arrived, the person had vanished. This is what Andrew might look like now, just being the age that he may be if he's still alive. Theories about this case is that he may have gone to London to meet up with someone or go to a concert. Was he lured there by somebody with bad intentions, or was he just going there for the day, gonna come back, and was at the wrong place at the wrong time and somebody did something bad to him? In 2009, the family paid for a search of the River Thames to try and find some sort of closure. The search did find a body, but it wasn't Andrew's. The most up-to-date information that we have on this case is that 2 men were arrested on suspicion of kidnapping Andrew, but they've actually been released. This is the disturbing case of the Slender Man stabbing. On the morning of the 31st of May 2014, a man on a bike ride in Wisconsin made a shocking discovery. A 12-year-old girl, Peyton Leutner, was lying on the grass covered in blood. The day prior, the young girl had been at a sleepover with some of her friends. She hadn't realised that the sleepover had been a trick to lure her into the woods to murder her. 2 years before what the media dubbed the Slender Man stabbing, Peyton had met her friend Morgan at school. The pair had become friends when Peyton noticed her sitting alone in the cafeteria and felt sorry for her. The two became close, and then they made another friend, Anissa Weir. Anissa, on the left here, was described as a cruel girl. She seemed really jealous of the friendship between Peyton and Morgan. As their friendship grew, Anissa and Morgan became obsessed with the internet meme Slender Man. Slender Man was a tall, faceless man with long arms who turned viral when people would Photoshop him into creepy images. The mythical man would prey on young children and lure them into the woods to kill people. Shockingly, around December 2013, Morgan and Anissa concocted a plan to kill someone in order to show their dedication to the fictional Slender Man. Their plan was to invite Peyton to Morgan's birthday to get her alone, and then lure her into the woods and kill her. Morgan actually described this as a flawless plan. As the girls started their walk to the woods, Morgan snuck a knife from her kitchen into her waistband. They then completely blindsided poor Peyton. Morgan jumped on top of her and started stabbing her. The two perpetrators then run off, claiming that they were going to go and get help. The young girl was left to struggle on her own and crawl towards the road to get help. When the cyclist discovered her, an ambulance arrived and nurses noted that she had 19 stab wounds. She had 6 hours of intensive surgery but miraculously survived. The girls were charged with attempted first-degree intentional homicide. Now, the jury actually found Morgan not criminally responsible due to schizophrenia. She was sentenced to 40 years in a mental health institution. Anissa had apparently experienced shared psychotic disorder and was sentenced to 25 years in a mental health institution.
Actor Sacha Baron Cohen may have uncovered a pedophile ring while filming one of his TV shows. So in the series Who is America, Sacha Baron Cohen traveled around America. And in the show he did a lot of crazy things like getting Dick Cheney to sign a waterboarding kit and having Roy Moore take a pedophile lie detector test. But the stuff that they filmed in Las Vegas was so dark that they ended up sending it to the FBI. In this specific scene, Sacha, who was playing a character, was interviewing a concierge in Las Vegas. In the interview, Sacha told the concierge that he had molested an 8-year-old boy. Now this is weird, but he justified this as saying this is extreme comedy and we wanted to see what he would say. Now I'm going to read you a quote from Sacha. He said, "Instead, this concierge stays in the room and I go, listen, you got to help me get rid of the problem. And this guy starts advising Gio how to get rid of this issue. We even at one point talk about murdering the boy and the concierge is just saying, well, listen, I'm really sorry. In this country, we can't just drown the boy. This is America. We don't do that. And then in the end, he puts me in touch with a lawyer who can silence the boy. It became really dark stuff." So, as if this interview couldn't get any darker, somehow this footage does. Sacha then asked the concierge if he could help him find a date for the night. Sacha told the concierge he wanted a young boy, quote, lower than bar mitzvah, but older than 8. And this concierge allegedly told him, yeah, I can put you in touch with somebody who can get you some boys like that. Now, this gets a little interesting as well. This is a quote from Sacha. He said, "We immediately turned over the footage to the FBI because we thought perhaps there's this pedophile ring in Las Vegas that's operating for these very wealthy men." And this concierge said that he'd worked for politicians and various billionaires. But in the end, the FBI decided not to pursue it. That's really concerning to me. Why would the FBI not look into something like this? I mean, they have hidden camera footage of somebody admitting that they can procure young boys for money. And yet, yeah, the FBI never officially looked into it. Sacha and his team turned this footage over, and the rest is history. Nothing ever came of this. Now, obviously, there have been some allegations made against Sacha by Rebel Wilson recently. I covered those on TikTok, but what do you guys make of this story? Do you think that there's a pedophile ring operating in Las Vegas? If you want to hear more true crime stories, listen to the podcast Murder in America that I co-host with my wife, Courtney. The podcast is available on all streaming platforms.
This is the worst thing that ever happened at a concert, and whatever you do, don't look up the video. This is a photograph from a packed out concert, and playing on the stage is the LA-based band called the Great Whites. It's a late evening on February 20th, 2003, and the band is performing at the station in Warwick, Rhode Island. Just after 11 p.m. during the opening song of Great White's set, the band pyrotechnics went off as planned. And very quickly, everything started to go horribly wrong. Almost immediately, the foam on top of the stage and the walls caught fire and the flames erupted all around. The fire spread quickly, way too quickly for anybody to react. Smoke filled the entire venue and the band was able to get out through the stage exits. But this left hundreds of audience members panicking and clambering all over each other in a desperate bid to get fresh air from outside since the whole room was filling with smoke. In the video, you see people screaming and being crushed. It's honestly horrific, and I don't recommend looking it up. Within 6 minutes of the pyrotechnics going off, the building was in flames. There were 4 exits for the venue, but almost all of the crowd made a break for the main entrance, the one that they all came in from. This resulted in a massive human wall of people falling on top of each other and crushing each other and blocking a lot of people inside with the flames. It would later turn out the venue was overcrowded beyond its legal limit. It had no fixed sprinkler system, and although they had a fire alarm, it wasn't connected to the local fire department. According to survivors, it's one of the most horrifying things they had ever seen. People piling up on each other, crushing anyone who was unlucky enough to be below. Half-burnt human beings being pulled from the flames. It was snowing also, so survivors were rubbing snow onto the burnt survivors. In total, 100 people lost their lives and more than 200 people were injured. Ty Longley, who was the guitarist for Great White, also died. The tour manager who set off the pyrotechnics was charged in the involuntary manslaughter of 100 people and sentenced to 15 years in prison, although he was released early as the victims' families appealed on his behalf. The owners of the venue pleaded no contest and they faced similar jail terms. This photograph shows the band and crowd of people completely unaware of the horrors that are about to happen to all of them. I don't recommend watching the video or looking it up because, as I already said, it really is horrifying.
Did this woman solve her own murder from beyond the grave? On February 21st, 1977, Teresita Bassa had just finished a day's work at Edgewater Hospital in Chicago, and she returned home to her apartment. Later that evening, Teresita's neighbours smelled smoke coming from her apartment, and they called 911. When firefighters entered the apartment, they found a mattress on the living room floor engulfed in flames. Underneath that mattress was Teresita's body, burning and with a knife sticking out of her chest. Due to the fire, most of the evidence, including fingerprints, had been completely destroyed, but police did find a note in Teresita's diary that said, "Get theatre tickets for AS," and then the case went completely cold. Around 6 months later, the lead investigator on the case got a call from Evanston police, saying that they'd spoken to a man named Dr. Jose Chua, and he claimed that he had information about the murder of Teresita, and that this information had come from Teresita herself. Dr. Chua said that his wife Remy had worked with Teresita at the hospital, and that on 3 separate occasions she'd become possessed by Teresita. He said that during these episodes she would be in a trance-like state, and she would be speaking in Teresita's native tongue. He claimed that the first thing Remy had said was, "Doctor, I need your help. The man that murdered me is still at large. I am Teresita Bassa." She then told Jose that she'd been murdered by a man named Alan Showery, who was repairing her TV but then stabbed her and stole her jewellery. Detective Joseph Stachula noticed that Alan Showery had the same initials that they'd found noted in Teresita's diary. Apparently, Alan Showery was actually known to Remy and Teresita, as he too worked at the hospital, and Teresita had been paying him generously to do odd jobs around the apartment. Police decided to pay Alan a visit, and they spoke to his girlfriend Yanka, who was wearing this jewellery. It belonged to Teresita, and she said that Alan had given it to her as a Christmas present. Alan was arrested, and at first he did actually confess to the murder, but later retracted this, saying that police had forced a confession after saying that they would arrest Yanka, who was pregnant with his baby. A judge decided that the trial did need to go ahead, and surprisingly, while awaiting trial, Alan again confessed to the murder. He was sentenced to 14 years in prison, but he actually served just 4 and was released on parole.
Breaking news, a shootout between this guy and the FBI 2 years ago has just led to a massive arrest of over 100 members of a global pedophile network. This is a tragic and sad story, but I'm thankful that these people are being arrested and brought to justice. So this is David Lee Huber. He was born and raised in Louisiana, but he eventually moved to southern Florida where he lived for most of his life. And on February 2nd, 2021, the FBI showed up to his front door because they were serving a warrant for his involvement in a CP case. And apparently the things that this guy was doing involving the CP were graphic and disturbing, so they sent out a huge force to take him in. So when agents first showed up at his door to serve this warrant, he saw them on his Ring doorbell camera, grabbed a rifle, and immediately began firing at them. A lot of the officers returned fire, but unfortunately 2 officers were struck and killed immediately. These were officers Daniel Alfin and Laura Schwarzenberger. Laura was killed instantly, but Daniel was hit and managed to return fire before he was killed. So after an absolutely massive police presence showed up and began returning fire, Daniel Lee Huber then barricaded himself inside of his home, returned fire a few times, but eventually took his own life. This obviously led to a massive response from the authorities, and when they looked into the computers and devices that he had in his possession, they were shocked. So apparently Daniel Lee Huber had been tied into an international pedophile ring. This ring operated on the dark web, they had highly encrypted file sharing devices, And this network spanned the globe, and when they found out that this guy was connected to all these other people, an international investigation was launched. Part of this investigation was focused in Australia, where a bulk of the people committing these crimes were located. I mean, all this was made public just yesterday, but the Australian suspects that were just arrested are between 32 and 81 years old. They're highly intelligent, as was stated on the release. They know how to manipulate computers and internet networks. And a lot of these members of this ring were producing and sharing their own CSAM or CP, which means that these men were some of the worst of the worst. But this led to an international investigation, like I said, and people were arrested here in America as well, a number of pedophiles that were attached to this network. So I definitely would consider this a win. Obviously, we don't know yet who was connected to this, what's going to come out of this, or exactly what these people were doing, but I think this is a step towards justice. And sadly, these two agents who heroically sacrificed their lives trying to protect children ended up saving so many more. But yeah, just here in America, 43 people connected to this investigation have already been arrested for producing CP, possessing CP, all of that. And I'm hoping they will arrest hundreds more.
This case will put you off ever talking to anyone online. This male stabbed his girlfriend over 90 times and then FaceTimed his sister to show her the dead body. Ashley Wadsworth was a 19-year-old girl who met Jack Seppel on Facebook in 2015. She was roughly 11 or 12 at the time, and Jack was around 15 or 16. They spent the following years continuously sharing messages and chatting online about their lives. Now, Ashley was from Canada and Jack was from Essex in the UK. Jack treated her really nicely to begin with, talking to her all the time and showering her with gifts and attention. When Ashley turned 16, the relationship between the two began to develop. Ashley would ask her parents often if she could go to the UK to travel to meet Jack. At first they were obviously against this, seeing as Jack lived abroad and the two had never met. However, in 2021, Ashley had graduated high school and saved up to make the trip to meet Jack. Jack actually reassured Ashley's family that he would guard her with his life. Little did they know, she wouldn't actually need protecting from anyone other than him. In November 2021, the pair met for the first time. They went sightseeing around London and Ashley documented this on her social media. However, things began to take a turn over the next couple of months. Jack started controlling Ashley. He demanded her social media passwords and made her delete photos without him in them. He also became physically abusive towards her. She was covered in bruises from Jack, and in one altercation he smashed a glass over her head. The young girl tried to reach out for help from her friends, but it was clear she was scared of Jack. Bearing in mind Jack had access to all of her social media, she sent a message to one of her friends one day warning, "Be careful what you say, he's watching," and she then unsent the message to prevent him seeing it. On the 1st of February 2022, Ashley turned up to Jack's mum's flat barefoot. She had run there, she was crying and hysterical. She said Jack had smashed her phone, beat her up and cut her hand. Now, following this incident, her parents actually booked her a flight home. She was relieved by this and returned to Jack's flat to wait to go home. Now that day, bearing in mind this is now obviously nighttime in Canada, Ashley's sister received a text begging her to wake up and answer the phone. When she eventually got this message, she tried to ring Ashley back and got no reply. At this point, Jack's mum tried to go round to Jack's house and get in. She wasn't able to do so and the police were eventually called. When officers arrived, Jack wouldn't open the door, so they forced entry. They found an absolutely hideous scene. Jack was lying next to Ashley's dead body in a pool of blood. Jack was casually on FaceTime to his sister, showing her the dead body. He admitted to strangling her and stabbing her. Jack was sentenced to life with a minimum of 23.5 years.
This is the man that news sources are calling the worst pedophile in world history. And recently he was sentenced to 22 years in prison in Russia for committing over 900 assaults and attacks on children. This is Viktor Lashovsky, the gold-toothed pedophile. And he claimed that he treated his victims as his personal harem and his slaves. So Viktor is from a small town named Amersk in Russia. And in his time spent living there in the town, at one point he was an evangelical pastor and he owned a small shoe shop. By day, he was the loving father, the family man, the owner of a small shoe shop, but at night he was going out and attacking children. So this is a small sample of some of the children that Viktor cared for. He was a foster parent and a stepfather. He volunteered a lot in his local community. And he and his wife had 3 biological children together, but they fostered 9 more, which meant that they had 12 children in their household. Viktor used this easy access to his advantage, and he preyed on all of the children that were under his care. Some of his attacks were even described as violent, and I can't get into the details of some of the things that he did, but they are truly atrocious and disturbing. But what's even more shocking is that some of his victims never wanted to come forward because they considered him to be a good dad. They didn't really understand what he was doing to them. Eventually though, one of the girls went to her foster mother and told her about what her foster father had been doing to her, and obviously she immediately ran to the police. This would end up unraveling a massive amount of abuse that Victor was carrying out. And like I said, when he went to court, he was charged with 900 counts of abuse. I mean, that is an absolutely staggering number. Most of Victor's victims were under the age of 13 as well, and this guy was just sick. And so for all of this, for 900 counts of abuse, he got 22.5 years of prison. And apparently, I don't know how Russian prison systems are, but he's going to be in a strict regime penal colony. If you guys know what that means, please enlighten me in the comments. And I want to state, I do not think 22 years is nearly enough prison time for this guy for 900 counts of abuse. This all happened in 2018, which means that he's already 5 years into his sentence, so in 17 years, this guy will be out walking the streets of his small town in Russia.
Sometimes true for stranger than fiction. The case of Richard Trenton Chase is a story which even the most depraved horror writer would struggle to create. Over the course of 4 weeks spanning across 1977 and 1978, Richard Chase took the lives of 6 innocent victims in Sacramento, California. His murders gradually progressed in violence, beginning with drive-by shootings and culminating in acts of cannibalism.
This police officer arrested a young girl, kidnapped her and murdered her. Sarah Everard was born in Surrey in 1987. At the time of her disappearance, she was living in the Brixton area and working as a marketing executive. On the 3rd of March 2021, she was walking home from visiting a friend in Clapham, South London. At around 9 p.m, she began the 2.5-mile journey home from her friend's house. She'd initially been chatting to her boyfriend on the phone as she walked home. She was captured on camera walking alone at around 9:32 p.m. 3 minutes later, a bus CCTV camera captured her being kidnapped. Within a matter of 5 minutes, she was gone. She'd been stopped by Wayne Couzens. He was a police officer and he used his powers to handcuff her at about 9:34 p.m. He was using the excuse of her breaching COVID guidelines. It transpired that on the 28th of February, Wayne had rented a white Vauxhall from a car hire company in Dover in order to kidnap a lone female. After kidnapping the vulnerable woman, he drove her to Kent. Police launched an urgent investigation when Sarah's boyfriend Josh reported her missing. On the 5th of March, Wayne was captured on CCTV filling a petrol container at a service station. He then shockingly burned Sarah's dead body inside of a fridge. On the 8th of March, he went off sick from work with stress. On the 9th of March, he was arrested. When officers asked, he initially denied knowing Sarah. He then concocted an elaborate story of how a gang of Eastern Europeans had threatened him and his family. He claimed that they had demanded that he would collect a girl for them. He claimed that he'd picked Sarah up and dropped her off for them as he was fearing for his family's life. And while he was in police custody, Wayne was hospitalised following a self-inflicted head injury. A week after she vanished, Sarah's remains were discovered in a woodland area of Kent. This was only metres away from land owned by Wayne. She had to be identified from dental records, and this happened on the 12th of March. On the day she was identified, Wayne was charged with kidnap and murder. He would eventually plead guilty to kidnap, murder and R. It was discovered that Wayne had hired a car and bought a roll of strong tape days prior to the murder. This was obviously evidence of premeditation. He was sentenced to life in prison, but shockingly that was not the last we would hear of Wayne. He was charged with 4 further counts of indecent exposure related to alleged incidents in January and February 2021. He pleaded guilty to 3 incidents. Sickeningly, the following year, 2 of his colleagues, Jonathan Cobban and Joel Borders, were jailed for sending grossly offensive messages. The 3 police officers were part of a sickening WhatsApp group where they sent racist, homophobic, misogynistic and ableist messages.
This woman killed her boyfriend by suffocating him in a suitcase, and whatever you do, don't look up the video. This case involves 42-year-old TikToker Sarah Boone and her then-boyfriend George Torres Jr., where her boyfriend was stuck in a suitcase after a drunk night. On February 24th, 2020, the next morning, Sarah called 911 to report that her boyfriend was dead. Sarah claimed to have nothing to do with the death, and George got drunk on wine the night before and thought it was a good idea to play hide and seek, and during their game, George hid in the suitcase as she zipped it up. According to Sarah, in her drunken state, she completely forgot about George and the game and went upstairs and fell asleep. This left George in the death trap suitcase where he sadly succumbed to suffocation and died in the suitcase. When Sarah woke up the next morning, she couldn't find George, and after a quick look around, she vaguely remembered the game. She then opened the suitcase and found George's dead body. This, of course, is how Sarah tells the story. But after a deeper investigation, the story of what actually happened unfolded. George had a history of domestic violence, and Sarah had reported it several times. And each time, Sarah either dropped the charges or bailed him out herself. It was a toxic love-hate relationship. The story that Sarah fed the police had so many flaws, and the police investigated more. And what they found only confirmed their suspicions. Because believe it or not, Sarah wasn't even arrested the day she reported George's death. And she only saw it as a drunken mistake and didn't think she would be accountable for it at all. But around the same time, this TikTok video went viral, and thousands of people thought it was just a prank on her boyfriend. But actually, it was torture for George inside and his last terrifying moments of life. The TikTok belonged to Sarah, and the police found the footage of George asking, or rather begging, to be let out of the suitcase, while Sarah sat back saying, "For everything you've done to me." Police then asked Sarah to come down to the station for a few questions, and this is where they searched her phone and found the footage that Sarah claims she didn't remember taking. So they showed her the video. The video was already damning evidence. And after, they told her they have footage of her flipping the suitcase over with George still inside, begging to be left out. Sarah then defended herself, saying she wasn't malicious. But the video shows her saying "F you" to George. And the police told her that saying that and laughing in the video is malicious. At one point in the video, George says he can't breathe as Sarah replies, "I can't breathe when you cheat on me." At this point, Sarah is deep in a hole, and she continues to blame it on the wine, but the police say one bottle of wine shouldn't get you that drunk. Sarah then claims that she wasn't drunk, and her story then falls apart more and more. Sarah would eventually be charged with second-degree murder after trying to wiggle out of it with her awful story. I'm going to say it again, I don't recommend watching the video because it really is unsettling and gut-turning. It's so disturbing watching the video with him in the suitcase telling her he can't breathe and her just laughing about it. You can literally hear the air leaving George's body every time he talks. It's just so sad, and it definitely wasn't a good way to die. So whatever you do, don't watch or search up the video.
This case has so many twists and turns that you won't know what to believe. It was the 13th of July 2017 in McLean in Virginia. Pam Hagen lived in a luxurious house with her daughters and one granddaughter. These were 24-year-old Helen, 34-year-old Megan, and Megan's 8-year-old daughter. Pam was a loving mother who was generous to her daughters, who she just wanted to have a better life. Behind the scenes, though, things were getting tense in the household. Pam was reportedly planning to buy her youngest daughter Helen a house. She apparently was refusing to do the same for her eldest daughter, though, which was causing tension. Another issue was that although Pam wanted to buy a house for Helen, she didn't like Helen's boyfriend. She told Helen that she would buy her the house under the condition that her boyfriend Carlos didn't live there. On the day in question, Pam began to panic. She'd had a notification that someone was trying to steal $400,000 out of her bank account. She asked Megan if she could go to the bank and try and sort this out. Megan did so, and she was captured on CCTV doing this. The issue seemed to be resolved until the next day. At 11:30 a.m., Helen's boyfriend Carlos got a panicked call from Helen. He said she sounded really scared. He said that Helen had said that Megan had killed their mum. It's not really clear what happened between the time period of 11:30 a.m. and 1:15 p.m, but it's believed that Carlos then tried to ring her back at 1:15 p.m. This time he wasn't able to get through to Helen. He rang police and told them that he feared something really bad had happened to her as well as the mum. At 3 p.m, police arrived on the scene to discover 2 dead bodies. Pam was deceased in the utility room and had a blanket covering her and a phone on top of her. Helen was also deceased in the upstairs bathroom with a rifle between her legs. She had a gunshot wound to the head. When police tracked Megan down and interviewed her, she said that she was at the house earlier on in the day, and then her mum and sister had started having an argument. She said it was an argument about the buying of the house and Carlos not being allowed to live in the house. It seemed that the deaths may have been a murder and then a self-unaliving. However, officers were skeptical and they felt that the scene had been staged. There was physical evidence pointing to the fact that things had been set up. There was a significant lack of blood on the rifle. There was also evidence that the phone on top of Pam's body had been wiped clean. Why would this be the case unless somebody was trying to get away with a crime? The most damning piece of evidence was Helen's gunshot wound. It was eventually determined she'd actually been shot in the top of the head. Then came a shocking confession. Megan finally admitted that the fraudulent bank transfer attempt had come from her and it was her trying to get her mum's money. She did, however, maintain innocence relating to the murders. She was then charged with double murder in 2018. Now, initially at her trial, she was found guilty of both murders and given 2 life sentences. However, the story does not end there. In 2022, the conviction was overturned. It was found that juror misconduct had occurred. A member of the jury had apparently tried to recreate the murder scene and found that the theory that Megan's defense team had presented, which was effectively that Helen had put the rifle between her legs and used her toe to pull the trigger, wasn't actually plausible. The fact that she'd done this and then shared this information with the rest of the jury was juror misconduct. There was then a retrial in 2023. Finally, Megan was found guilty again in 2024 and given life in prison.
Many of us are very familiar with this photo. I was just 13 years old at the time when it was splashed all over the news, and I can just remember hoping and praying that these 2 10-year-old girls would be found safe and well. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. If you're not familiar with this story, this is Jessica Chapman and Holly Wells, and they were the victims of a double child murder back in 2002 in Soham, Cambridgeshire. On Sunday, August 4th, 2002, Jessica left her house telling her parents that she was going round to Holly's as they were having a barbecue. She also had a necklace that she'd recently bought for her that she wanted to give to her. Little did they know when they said goodbye to their daughter that day, that was the last time that they'd see Jessica alive. Jessica arrived at Holly's house and they went upstairs to play video games and listen to music. They came down to eat some food and Holly's mum took this picture of them before they headed back upstairs. Around 6:15 that evening, the girls left the house without telling anyone and they went to a nearby leisure centre to get sweets from a vending machine. Around 8 p.m, Holly's mum went upstairs to tell the girls to come downstairs and say goodbye to their guests, but Holly's room was empty. Nicola and her husband Kevin searched the house and then went out onto the street to look for the girls, but they were nowhere to be seen. They then called Jessica's parents to see if the girls had turned up there, but they were also worried as it was just past Jessica's curfew and she hadn't returned home. Just before 10 p.m, and after frantic efforts from both families to locate the girls, they were both reported missing. Tragically, Holly and Jessica were already dead by this point. An intensive search began immediately. 400 officers were assigned full-time to search for the girls. Hundreds of locals also joined in with the search, and the police were doing door-to-door inquiries. One of the locals that was heavily involved in the search was this man, Ian Huntley. He was a caretaker in the area and his girlfriend also worked at the girls' school and had just applied for a full-time teaching assistant job there. Ian actually told police that he'd seen the girls on the day that they disappeared, and he said the same thing in a TV interview.
Ian Huntley here is a familiar figure. Evening, Ian. You're the school caretaker. The girls, Jessica and Holly, would know you, and they saw you on the front doorstep. What went on?
Well, I don't know the girls. I stood on the front doorstep grooming my dog down. She'd run away and come back a bit of a mess. They just came across and asked how Miss Carr was, as she used to teach them at St Andrews. I just said she weren't very good, as she hadn't got the job. And they just said, please tell her that we're very sorry. And off they walked in the direction of the library over there.
Maxine told police that she'd been in the bath at the time and had heard Ian talking to the girls before he came back inside the house. In actual fact, Maxine wasn't even in Soham at the time that the girls disappeared. She was in Grimsby visiting her mother, but she was covering for Ian. Maxine also did a TV interview and she kept referring to the girls in the past tense, saying things like, they were really lovely. And she then made a direct appeal to the children to come home. The police were immediately suspicious of the couple's story, and after searching the house they noted that most of the rooms seemed to have been recently cleaned. There was also washing hanging on the line outside, despite the fact that it had been raining. It wasn't long before Ian's appearance started to change. He was losing weight and he was actually showing signs of paranoia, even saying to one officer, "You think I did it, I was the last one to see them alive." They became even more suspicious of Ian when he started asking police how the investigation was going. He even went as far as asking them how long DNA evidence could survive before deteriorating. This prompted them to search his house one more time, as well as Soham Village College where he worked, and they made a discovery that would lead to his arrest. They found a metal bin in the grounds that contained the charred remains of 2 Manchester United shirts. Fibres from the shirts were a precise match to those found on Ian's clothing and in his house, and his fingerprints were also found on the bin. They also searched Ian's car and found that just like the house, it had been recently cleaned. The lining of the boot had also been removed and replaced with carpet. On August 17th at 4:30 a.m, Ian and Maxine were both arrested, and just 8 hours later, the girls' bodies were discovered. They were found by gamekeeper Keith Pryor, who had noticed an unpleasant smell near an irrigation ditch in Suffolk. They were laid side by side in the 5-foot ditch, and due to the amount of time that they'd been in there, they were in an advanced state of decomposition. The coroner stated that whoever murdered the girls had moved their bodies to this location and had also tried to burn them. A definite cause of death couldn't be determined, but the coroner did state that they most likely died from asphyxiation. Ian refused to answer questions in his police interviews, and he tried to fake mental illness. The police had no choice but to refer him for a psychological examination. Maxine was charged with perverting the course of justice and assisting an offender after she admitted to helping Ian concoct a story after he told her that the girls had actually been inside their house while she was away. According to Maxine, Ian had told her that the girls had come by the house because Holly had a nosebleed, and that he'd let them inside to try and help, and that he was afraid that he'd be accused of murder if they were found dead. She pleaded not guilty to both charges. On October 8th, Ian was declared mentally competent to stand trial, and he also pleaded not guilty to his charge of double murder. Eventually, the trial began in November 2003, and Ian gave his version of events. He claimed that the girls came by the house and Holly had a nosebleed, so he invited them both inside and took them to the bathroom. He said that the bath was full of water because he'd just washed his dog, and somehow he managed to knock Holly into the bath and she hit her head. He then said that Jessica started screaming, so in order to shut her up, he put his hand over her nose and mouth, and he accidentally suffocated her. He said when he turned back around to Holly in the bath, she too was dead. The jury deliberated for 4 days before coming back with their verdict. They accepted that Maxine only lied to police to protect her boyfriend, and that prior to their arrest, she believed his claims of innocence. She was found not guilty of assisting an offender and given 3.5 years in prison for perverting the course of justice. Ian Huntley was found guilty of 2 counts of murder and sentenced to life with a minimum of 40 years, meaning he can apply for parole in 2042 when he's 68 years old. The only reason he wasn't given a whole life tariff was because the passing of the Criminal Justice Act 2003 was the day after his conviction. Maxine Carr was released from prison on May 14, 2004, and she was given a new identity for her own protection. Ian Huntley is currently incarcerated at HMP Frankland in Durham. He's had many failed suicide attempts and has also been attacked by other prisoners countless times, including having boiling water poured over him at HMP Wakefield and having his throat slashed at HMP Frankland. Holly and Jessica's funerals took place just a day apart, and they were buried side by side.
Imagine getting married only to be decapitated by your husband 3 months later. 21-year-old couple Jared and Angie got married in October 2022. Around 4 p.m. on the 11th of January, police were called to their home in Texas. Police made a grim discovery in the pair's bathroom after finding, quote, what appeared to be the head of the victim to be in the shower, end quote. Angie's body was discovered on the floor near the bed in a pool of blood with multiple stab wounds to her back. It was actually Jared's poor parents that initially made this discovery after entering the home. They then obviously alerted police to what they found. Jared was arrested and has confessed to killing his wife with a kitchen knife. Jared was actually captured on CCTV, casually stealing a bottle of beer from Angie's workplace just minutes after it's believed that he killed her. Angie's friends have reported to police that the couple's relationship was toxic and Jared was very controlling. Jared's bond is currently set at $500,000.
This is Jared Fogle, one of the worst pedophiles in American history. So if you don't know who Jared Fogle was, he was the spokesperson for Subway for a number of years. Jared initially became famous and then eventually became the spokesman of Subway because he dropped so much weight while eating a Subway diet. According to Jared, he lost almost 245 pounds while eating almost exclusively from Subway. Obviously, this was a huge story, and when Subway heard about this, they contacted Jared and eventually made him the spokesman for their entire company. I swear to God, I remember this. For years, you couldn't turn on the TV without seeing this guy's face. So in 2004, when Jared was at the height of his popularity, he launched the Jared Foundation, a foundation determined to fight childhood obesity. This foundation saw Jared touring schools across the nation, talking to kids about losing weight, and yeah, just being heavily involved with children, which people at the time thought was a great thing. But it was when he was away from the cameras, behind the scenes, when Jared was engaging in some of the most deplorable behavior I've ever read about. So in 2007, a radio host and journalist from Florida came forward to the FBI and reported that Jared was saying and doing some concerning things. Apparently, while at a middle school event, Jared had been talking to her about performing lewd acts on a minor. He had texted her about all of these things, and she even recorded him saying all of this stuff. At one point, apparently, Jared even asked this journalist if she could install webcams in her children's bedrooms so he could watch them. Obviously, this was concerning. This journalist recorded all of this, turned it into the FBI, but they told her that they couldn't do anything because they didn't have enough evidence. And now we got to talk about Russell Taylor, a guy who was heavily involved in Jared's foundation. So when he wasn't working on the Children's Foundation, this guy, Russell Taylor, was producing CP in his home. Apparently, between the years 2011 and 2015, Russell Taylor had videotaped minors in his own home and traded photographs of them with none other than, you guessed it, Jared Fogle, king of the footlong. According to court documents, Jared actually asked Russell if he could move some of the nanny cams in his home so he could watch children in varying states of undress or while they were naked taking a bath. Russell also claimed that Jared made him set up accounts on porn sites in his name, and he wanted to basically run his whole CP operation for him. Well, shortly after Russell Taylor was arrested, Jared Fogle's home was raided, and guess what they found? A ton of CP. On the same day that his home was raided, Subway severed all ties with Jared, and some new disturbing facts came to light during the trial. Apparently, years prior, Jared had been texting a Subway franchisee named Cindy. And over these texts, he talked about wanting to abuse kids aged 9 to 16. He told Cindy she should sell herself for sex on Craigslist, and even asked her to arrange a sexual meetup between him and her 16-year-old cousin. Eventually, Jared pled guilty to possession of CP and traveling to conduct an illicit sexual behavior with a minor. Apparently, while in New York City, he paid to have sex with a 17-year-old girl. But this story isn't over yet. I'm going to post part 2, and it definitely gets more interesting from here on out.
This is one of the most horrific cases I've heard recently, so please be warned before watching. 29-year-old Taylor Parker has just been sentenced to death for a crime so horrendous that I can't believe a human is capable of this. Regan Simmons Hancock and Taylor had met online. Their online friendship soon blossomed into a real-life connection. It was 2022 and Regan was married with a young daughter. She was also 8 months pregnant at this time. Taylor was also pregnant, or so it would seem to the outside world. She was posting pregnancy pictures on social media and even hosted a gender reveal party. Little did her loved ones know that she was actually staging the entire thing. Regan and Taylor were really good friends around this time and they were bonding over their pregnancies. Regan even shared a Facebook status thanking Taylor for bringing her round a gift and Starbucks. This was the day before she would be murdered by Taylor. On Taylor's supposed due date, she made her way round to Regan's house in Texas. Shortly after, Regan's mum made a horrifying discovery. Her daughter was face down on the floor, deceased, with blood everywhere. Her mum rang the emergency services and they raced to the scene. It became apparent that her baby had been, and again a massive trigger warning here, ripped out of her stomach, and Regan had been stabbed over 100 times. Meanwhile, Taylor was pulled over for speeding and driving erratically. She'd actually put the baby in her lap with the umbilical cord coming out of her trousers to make it seem like she'd just given birth. When the pair were taken to hospital, the horrors of what actually happened became apparent. The newborn baby tragically passed away and Taylor was arrested. She was sentenced to death, but her defense lawyer said that her loved ones should have done more to protect her earlier on when she was pretending to be pregnant.